What's up, YouTube? This is Bystander X79, guys. Today I'm coming to you with my latest deck profile for August 2019. And guys, today we got an awesome one. I'm going to be doing my Amorphage deck. Now, Amorphages are an Earth Attribute Dragon-type Pendulum deck. Alright, this deck was released in the Shining Victory Core Booster set a couple of years back. I mean, that's the set that had all the cool new Blue Eye support in it. Alright, and I can tell you right now, been playing this deck for a whole lot of years, and I can tell you right now, it's a fun control deck, especially if you're playing Rogue. Alright, the Pendulum monsters have all these crazy effects that can actually allow you to turn around and control what your opponent can and cannot do, which is just amazing. While they're in the scales, while they're on the field, they have the ability to shut down special summonings, whether it be from the extra deck or all together. And I can tell you right now, the deck is amazing, okay? Now, yeah, there are kind of some pitfalls with this deck. One thing, the scale is insanely narrow. I mean, the Morphages are either scale 3 or scale 5, which means you're only pendulum summoning out the level 4 monsters from your extra deck to the field. However, even with that, there are cards and pieces that we've gotten in later sets that can actually help mitigate this process. Alright, and we're going to be going through that as I go through a deck. So, let's get to it. Alright, first and foremost, I'm going to be doing the scale 5 first. And we have Amorphage Goliath, 2 copies of him. Okay, now, Goliath, if you know a little bit about Goliath, he's been splashed in a lot of other decks that can get out rank 8 dragons. Primarily because once he hits the field, there's no special summoning happening, and it's a great way to lock your opponent out from doing a lot of things in today's game. That's his monster effect. While it's in the Pendulum effect, and this is the really cool stuff, while it's in the Pendulum, any monster your opponent sends to the graveyard is banished instead. So if you really think about today's metagame, alright, there are a lot, and I mean a lot of grave-dependent decks. I mean, if you look at Orcus needs to send some stuff to the graveyard before they banish it. This is going to bypass that, and that's going to create a lot of problems. Danger is required to be sent to the graveyard. Guess what? They're being banished. Salamangreats Greats need the graveyard. This is going to banish all their monsters. Alright? So all that recursion, gone. Alright? So you really turn around and see how this card can really hurt. I mean, even Sky Strikers, if you can banish their rays, they're not bringing rays back constantly. They're going to have to rely on popping their field spell to get them out. And even while this card's up in the scales, the second it leaves the field, it's gone. So yeah, definitely we've got to run 2. Alright, you got 2 copies of Amorphage Gluttony. Alright, now Gluttony and all the other lower level Amorphage monsters, they block summoning from the extra deck only. Okay? Special summoning specifically. The way they block it is if their flips face up or they're pendulum summoned out. So if you special summon this through another card effect or just normal summon it from your hand, it's not going to activate the effect. Alright? And the way to bypass this card's effect is basically to tribute these cards off in order to turn around and kind of turn off the effect so you can reach into your extra deck. Alright? Now while this card is in the Pendulum scale, it has an amazing effect. It basically shuts out all your opponent's monster effects. That means on the field, in the graveyard, being banished, or even in the hand, they're all shut off. Unless they're a Morphage's monster, your opponent's not using those monster effects. I can tell you this right now, if this card was a level 4, I'd definitely run this card at 3 copies max because it's just so devastating. Unfortunately, it's a level 2 and it's outside the scale, so we have to mitigate the number of cards. Now, the one card that I do turn around and that's outside the scale that I do run 3 copies of is going to be Amorphage Lechery. Alright, this is the Ultra version from the Shining Victory set. Amorphage Lechery, Goliath, and even Greed, which you'll be seeing a little bit later, are getting reprints in the Fist of the Gadget set. They're all going to be super rares, so pretty cool. Alright, so what does Lechery do? While it sits in your scale, guess what? Your opponent's not activating spells, and that basically kills a lot of decks that are spell dependent. Alright, that's why I like running this guy at 3, because there's always going to be decks that utilize spells. Most of the time, the spells are extenders in today's meta, but still, stopping those extenders can really hurt. Alright, so those are all the outside of the scale cards. Run about 7 of those. The remaining Amorphages are all level 4s, which means you can summon them, Pendulum summon them out of the extra deck, or your hand. So, 1 copy of Amorphage, Envy. Okay, Envy's pretty cool, primarily because while it's in your scale, your opponent's not going to be able to respond to your cards. It basically stops your opponent from activating card effects Chain Link 2 or higher. Alright. Going up into the next one, I have Amorphage Pride. Now, Pride here, while it sits in the scale, your opponent's not hitting you with effect damage. Now, the primary reason why I'm running 3 copies of Pride and only 1 copy of Envy, primarily because just Pride is the strongest level 4 we have in the archetype right now. Envy doesn't have any attack at all, it's just a defender. But if you feel free of playing around with the ratios, you could. Just remember that Envy here is a scale 5, so you might throw off the balance from the 3s to the 5s, but still, I actually do like running 2 copies of Amorphage Wrath. I mean, Wrath is actually pretty cool. It prevents your opponent from tributing monsters except for Amorphage monsters. So, unless they have things like Stormforth at their disposal, they're not going to be able to really tribute off your monsters, and that can actually hurt them very badly. This really hurts ritual-based decks like Necros. Alright? Alright, and the last one, the one I just mentioned before, is the 2 copies of Amorphage Greed. While this card sits in your scale, your opponent's not activating trap cards, and that can actually be pretty good against specific decks that like to run the back row. Alright? So that's it for the Amorphage cards. I mean, any combination of these scales can be lethal when played in the right combination, and I can tell you right now, worth it. Now, for some extra consistency, what I'm doing is I'm actually running 2 copies of Luster Pendulum, the Draco Slayer. Alright? I'm primarily using him for his Pendulum effect. While this card sits in your Pendulum, you can actually you can target the other card in your Pendulum, pop it, and search your deck for another copy of that same card, which is actually pretty good. This allows you to thin out your deck, load up your extra deck if you need to turn around and Pendulum summon out cards. Alright? Further, we have 2 copies of Magical Abductor. Magical Abductor is an amazing spellcaster for the deck. I know spellcaster in Book Dragons, but the thing about it is that it's level 4 and its Pendulum scale effect is amazing. Basically, whenever you're activating spell cards, whether it be just normal spells or even activating other cards in the other Pendulum zone, this card is going to gain a counter. Once it has 3 counters, you can remove those counters, and you can search your deck for another Pendulum monster to add to your hand, and that effect is not a hard once per turn. Yeah, don't have to worry about the monster effect. The Pendulum effect is all we really need. Alright. Going forward, we got 3 copies of Amorphage Infection. Now, this right here is a pretty damn important card for the Amorphage archetype. What happens is that whenever one of your Amorphage monsters is either tributed or destroyed by battle or card effect, you get to turn around and search your deck for another Pendulum or more Amorphage monster, and add it to your hand, which is just awesome. Alright? The other effect it has is that while this card is on the field, you turn around and count up the number of Amorphage cards you have on the field, and multiply it by 100, and then each card gains that much attack and defense on the field, which is actually pretty cool. Which basically will take something like Pride and boost it up. If you have 7 Amorphages on the field, or 6 Amorphages, that'll push it up to 2350, which is actually pretty good. A level 4 monster with 2350 attack, it's not something to easily sneeze at. I mean, Envy becomes a 2650 defender. I mean, so you get the idea. Not just to only hold things down, but this card is also stackable. So you can actually turn around and have 2 of these copies on the field and get multiple attack point increases, which will make your small monsters even bigger and harder to get over. Alright, now to help with the whole outside of the pendulum scale thing, I'm actually running 3 copies of Pendulum Paradox. What this allows you to do is it allows you to take a look at your pendulum, face up pendulum monsters in your extra deck. Pick 2 monsters with the same scale but with different names and add them back to your hand. Alright, this way you can actually just rid your extra deck of the monsters like Lechery, Gluttony, or Goliath, get them back into your hand so you can just resummon them later or reactivate them as scales in case they get popped. Alright? Great way to get cards back, and it's a great way to get stuff out of your extra deck. And not only that, but since you can Pendulum summon a whole lot better from your hand in Master Rule 4, it's a little bit better for level 4s too. Alright? Part of the extravagance, this deck doesn't really care that much about the extra deck, even though I try to build an extra deck that could be useful for it. It just allows you to get into your cards, into your deck a lot easier. Great consistency boost for the overall from the deck. Alright, I do run 1 copy of Scapegoat. This deck, in order to maintain your Amorphage cards in the Pendulum scales, you have to tribute monsters. Scapegoat will give you up to 4 monsters, which means you have potentially up to 4 tributes. Okay, you can also link off with that as well. Just saying. And one of the best cards I love running in this deck is Ties of the Brethren. I mean, Ties works insanely well with Amorphages, primarily because they're all the same type and attribute. Alright, and since the majority of the Morphages I run are the level 4s, it's easy to get 1 level 4 monster on the field and then use Ties to bring out 2 others. Now, downside of this card, you can't special summon any other further during the turn, but typically you're going to want to get a level 4 on the field, set your scales, activate this card, bring out the other 2 monsters, and then boom, you'll have the scales active, and you'll even have 2 tributes ready to go during your standby phase in the next turn. Alright, and one thing I love running in all Pendulum decks is Wavering Eyes. Oh my god. One of the considered top tier decks for this upcoming format is going to be Pendulum Magicians. Wavering Eyes just helps this deck take advantage of that. It has 4 effects depending on the number of cards in the Pendulum scales that you pop. Alright? You pop 1, you afflict your opponent with 500 points of effect damage, which is actually pretty handy when you're going into time. You pop 2 scales, you're able to search your deck for any Pendulum monster to add to your hand, so you get a search. You pop up to 3, you can get the other 2 effects, plus banish a card off your opponent's field. So great spot removal. And then if you pop 4, you're going to get all the other effects before that, and you get to search for another Wavering Eyes. It's a great card, great for Pendulum decks. I can tell you right now, I like running this card a lot. It just helps the deck out. Alright, for the back row, 3 copies of Solemn Judgment. I mean, we got it back off the ban list, and paying half your life points, pretty useful, especially in tight situations, because you can negate summons, spells, or traps, and that just help this deck survive. Alright. I do have 1 copy of Solemn Warning, just to negate monster effects or effects that can bring back monsters. Very useful. And last but not least, in case your opponent gets a little froggy, you got Storming Mirror Force, non-destruction, mass removal, just awesome for the deck. And it just allows you to basically clear your opponent's field, reestablish your board, and be able to turn around and cause a whole lot of problems for your opponent then. Alright, that's the main deck right there. Going on to the extra deck. Alright. Of course, this is a Pendulum deck. You gotta run Heavy Metals Foes Electromite. Alright, now guys, the one thing I want to talk about with the extra deck is that if you are going to reach for the extra deck, and you have one of these smaller Pendulum Amorphage monsters on the field that you were Pendulum summoned, you need to tribute it off with the scales before you can actually reach for your extra deck during this turn, alright? If you can turn that, once you turn those effects off, you're going to be free to go and build up your board even better. Alright, so Heavy Metal Foes Electromite, pretty important to all Pendulum decks. Get a Pendulum monster from your main deck into your extra deck face up on summon. Pop a card, you get to draw a card, and if it's one of the scales, you get one of the Pendulum cards back from your extra deck to your hand, which is actually pretty cool. Alright. 2 copies of Mrs. Radiant. I mean, you can bring both of these copies out with a single scapegoat, and since the majority of your monsters in this deck are all Earth Attribute, they're going to be getting massive power boosts from both having just both cards on the field. Alright. I run the Nightmare package if we need to go into it. Cerberus goes out to special summon monsters, Nightmare Phoenix at the back row, and this Unicorn just spins cards off the field. I mean, it's pretty standard. Pretty easy to understand. I do run Seruja. We're not going for the 4-name effect at all. What you want to do is you want to build into the 3-name effect so you can special summon things from your hand. That extra special summon just comes into so much handy. Alright. And not only that, but when you open up 3 zones beneath the card and it powers up the monsters that it points to, yeah, it's even better. Okay, you got a copy of Borolo Dragon. Very cool, awesome card that you can utilize to break boards of your opponent, to steal their monsters and be able to attack with them, which is actually pretty cool. If you don't like this card, other cards you can probably try to include would be Boral Sword. Appaloosa could be actually utilized in this deck as well. I mean, the negates for monster effects are actually pretty good. So there's a lot of different other Link 4s you can do. If you can find other Link 3s you want to run into, fine. Just remember that this deck really doesn't extend that much into the extra deck. So you're going to not be getting up that high that often, but if you ever do. Alright. I have Xyz monsters here. They're all rank 4. So you have Abyss Dweller, just on graveyard effects. Pretty important. Coyote Hellboy. Earth Attribute, which is actually pretty cool. Can actually burn for game. Alright. The Majesty Paladin of the Dragon Slayers. Very good for getting other Pendulum monsters out of your deck into your hand. Love running that. I do have the Utopia package in here. Help get over big monsters if you have to. Okay. Time Thief Redoer is actually there to play keep away with your opponent's cards. And then last but not least, I have number 41, Babushka, just to help with stall. Again, this is another Earth attributes you can take advantage of. Things like Mrs. Radiant if you ever extend into that far. Alright. Guys, that is it for my Amorphage deck for August 2019. Guys, this deck is just an amazing Pendulum control deck. It's great in rogue play. It can really take your opponent surprise because they're never going to see this deck coming. Alright? So guys, as always, if you like the deck, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content like this on my channel, make sure to subscribe. Enable notifications, especially the YouTube notifications, so you don't miss a single upload. Guys, check out the description box below. Find the invite link to my Discord server. Join the conversation. We would love to have you. Follow me on Twitter at BystanderX79. And guys, until next time, as always, peace.